right. Welcome again to History 361, Archaic and Classical Greece. And today we're going to be starting to talk about the rise of the Athenian Empire, the development of the Athenian Empire in the early part of the 5th century BC. We left off, of course, with the end of the Persian Wars. And following the victories at Plataea, which destroys a significant portion of the Persian army, and then the near synchronous victory at Mycale, the Greeks go on the offensive. They have the Athenian fleet, they have this large Spartan army, and they engage in a series of campaigns in the Aegean to try to take back islands and coastal areas that had been occupied by the Persians. And indeed, one kind of puzzle is the sort of seeming kind of inability of Persia to strike back. I think it probably is fair to say that the Persians did suffer pretty substantial losses: the destruction of the fleet at Salamis, the loss of this army, destruction of yet another fleet at Mycale. And so for the moment, even though Persia overall has far more resources than even the combined Greek city-states, for the moment the Greeks take to the offense. This offensive continues into 479 and 478 under the leadership of the Spartans. Sparta is acknowledged as the most militarily powerful state in all of Greece. The Spartan army still is the core of the land forces. And so the actual general in charge of this operation is Pausanias. Pausanias had commanded the entire Greek muster at the Battle of Plataea. He is the brother of Leonidas and commands as regent. Regent for Leonidas's, at this point, underage son, Plistarchus. So in some ways, as regent, as sort of the uncle, Pausanias his position is not as strong, his constitutional position back in Sparta. But he does have the advantage of having just overseen this truly splendid victory. Now, back in Athens, the Athenians return to their city and find it in utter ruins. Again, the Persians have really trashed everything. They've completely razed the buildings of the Acropolis. All of the temples have been torn down and sacked and smashed to pieces. This was clearly a deliberate attempt to basically make a statement of Persian power, to indicate how the Athenians were unable to defend their home city. And so the Athenians set about rebuilding. Now, the first thing that it would be logical to rebuild would be the city walls. And here, the first kind of tensions with Sparta come out. Sparta, of course, Sparta and Athens are brothers in arms. They've fought side by side at Plataea. They've been the two leading city-states in this anti-Persian coalition. But excuse me, all of a sudden, the Spartans actually send the ambassador, say, you know what, Athens, you don't need to rebuild your walls. I don't think you need walls at all. In fact, really, no city-state should have walls. You should be like Sparta. And it's true, Sparta does not have city walls. It's actually a kind of exception among more powerful Greek city-states in deliberately not building walls. And that, of course, itself is ideological. The idea that we don't need walls. We're the Spartans. It's the excellence of the Spartan army that defends Laconia. We have no need to fall back simply to a wall. At the same time, clearly the Spartans are perhaps worried about the extent that the Athenians will enjoy a resurgence after they return to their devastated city, and therefore openly discourage them from putting up fortifications. Now, Thucydides, in his first book, tells us that here the sort of trickster is Themistocles, who goes to Sparta and basically keeps kind of delaying. Says, "Oh, I want to go meet and talk to the talk to the Spartan Ecclesia, but I need to wait. I'm waiting for instructions, and I can't do it today, and I'm feeling sick. And essentially, he delays and he delays and he delays until the Athenians, who this whole time have been rushing to throw up emergency fortifications, finally complete a circuit wall around the city. And these circuit walls are notable for basically being built out of the rubble that the Persians had left behind, delivering very, very hasty fortifications. But nonetheless, Athens now has a circuit wall, and it seems, at least in Thucydides' description, that Themistocles then says, hey, you're too late. We've already done it. So, again, a first kind of bit of tension between Sparta and Athens as Athens reasserts itself as a simply fortified city. Now, meanwhile, in the Allied camp, amongst the Greeks who are carrying out this campaign, there starts to become a real frustration with the leadership of Pausanias, and some of that may even represent a frustration with the Spartan leadership style to begin with. Remember, Spartan boys grow up being ruthlessly hazed in the agoge, and then they're trained to ruthlessly abuse helots. Spartans are used to inflicting physical punishment both on younger boys when they're in the agoge, whippings, and then are used to inflicting physical punishment on periokoi, on helots. And this is simply kind of an aspect of how Spartans see themselves kind of as officers in the Spartan army. Now, that being said, the soldiers in this Greek coalition army who come from much more egalitarian city-states really find this offensive, the idea that an officer would dare to whip you. And so the Spartans oftentimes do not impress the Greek soldiers that they serve alongside. And Pausanias himself has a reputation for haughty and high-handed leadership. And so the Greeks finally basically force him out. Now, the Spartans are not entirely happy with Pausanias either. And this is actually a key point. Why do the Spartans basically voluntarily abandon the leadership of this great coalition effort? Well, it seems the Spartans are unnerved by the entire project. Or at least there are some in Sparta who are unnerved by the entire project. One is the aggrandizement of Pausanias himself. And again, Pausanias is a regent. He's supposed to be a relative of the king, just in a placeholder position. And he starts acting, particularly after his victory at Plataea, in a particularly high-handed fashion. And this worries some Spartans, is Pausanias acting kind of above what just a regent should be acting like. There are concerns, and indeed Pausanias is tried and acquitted, at least initially, that Pausanias is in league with the Persians somehow. And some of this may simply be the fact that Pausanias is abroad. The Spartans don't have the kind of visibility on him when he's campaigning around the Aegean as they would when he's back in Sparta. And that kind of anxiety manifests itself in fears that Pausanias is conspiring with the Persians or in league with the Persians. Again, he's actually acquitted, although he's subsequently tried again about 7 years later for conspiring with the Helots, and he's essentially executed by being starved to death inside a temple. So Pausanias actually does not end well. And again, part of the reason that he doesn't end well is both, it seems, his personal style, but also, again, the kind of fragility of his own constitutional position. And he's the regent, not the king. Although, paradoxically, one of his sons subsequently does become one of the two kings of Sparta. So Pausanias is recalled. Again, the Greeks don't like his high-handed leadership. The Spartans are kind of anxious about, what will be Pausanias' position in Sparta when he has this incredibly important and powerful and potentially corruptible position abroad. And so it seems the Spartans are actually happy to give up the leadership of this campaign in order to basically quell some of their anxieties about just operations abroad in general. Remember, the Spartans, by and large, are not interested in engaging in foreign adventures. The thing most people in Sparta care about is hanging out in Sparta and keeping the Helots down. So the leadership, therefore, of this anti-Persian campaign is given to the Athenians. And the Athenians are basically more than happy to accept it. The Athenians have always been more interested in expeditionary campaigns, going all the way back to the Ionian Revolt in the 490s. And as your textbook discusses, the Athenian democracy is still a quite bellicose institution. So from now on, it will be Athenian generals, the various strategoi who are sent out year after year, who will be overseeing the operations against the Persians. Now, initially, these operations are very much allied operations. So there is a coalition of Greek city-states, and they each are sending contingents of men and ships, and also the money to pay those men and ships. And the Athenians, in order to kind of centralize the administration, set up a treasury for this league at the island of Delos. And therefore, this is initially, this project is referred to from 478 onwards, when the league treasury is established at Delos, as the Delian League. And so we have this nice, happy kind of mutual coalition. But there's no question that the Athenians are increasingly contributing the largest number of ships, and they're also contributing the actual sort of strategic leadership. It's an Athenian general who's overseeing the various operations. Now, over time, the Athenians, say to the various members of this coalition, you know what? If you're having trouble manning a fleet, don't worry. Instead of sending ships and the money to pay your own ships, just send money. And then we can take that money and use it to field a larger Athenian fleet. And for a small polis that maybe only has a few thousand adult male citizens, and fielding even 2 or 3 triremes is involves a significant chunk of your population. This excuse me. This seems like a pretty attractive offer. And so over time, the coalition of various ships from various communities starts to turn into an Athenian fleet that is financed by the contributions of this group of allies. And it's this dynamic with now the allies kind of themselves demilitarizing. Maybe they're not even building or maintaining triremes, they're just sending money. And the Athenians, meanwhile, are sending their navy out every single season. Athenian citizens are becoming really good at being rowers in triremes, and they're also starting to depend on those triremes, that service as rowers, for their livelihood. And so therefore you start to have a project where Athens has the navy, it's got the ships, it's got the men, and the Greeks, the other Greek states, just are providing the money and really actually no longer have the ships or men to resist if they would prefer to do otherwise. And so, the basic kind of dynamic is this coalition of the willing, you might call it, starts to harden into an Athenian empire, as the Athenians are far and away the most militarily powerful state. They actually contribute the majority of the actual combat power, and therefore have extraordinary and potentially coercive leverage over the other Greek poleis in this league. Now, again, this hardening into an empire happens slowly, and indeed it may not really be until kind of the latter part of the 4th century, latter part of the 5th century, probably sometime after 450, that kind of the mask comes off, and many of these Greek city-states realize that they have no choice but to continue paying tribute to Athens. But again, initially, there is still this aspect of a kind of mutual defense league. The Persians are still a threat. They still have military forces in the Aegean, and many of the Greek cities, including those that have been recently liberated from the Persians, are more than happy to make a contribution to what is, could be legitimately in the 470s and 460s build as a militarily, mutually advantageous exercise. So now Athens is keeping a fleet in the Aegean year after year. The funding for this fleet is now coming from abroad, and yet the money is entering through the sailors and rowers of the Athenian fleet, and therefore coming back to Athens. So this economically is a really good deal for Athens. And it helps that the Athenians do follow through. They do score some big victories for the Greek coalition. In particular, a massive victory over the Persian fleet at the river Eurymedon at some point in the 460s. We don't even have an exact year for when this victory takes place, but in the 460s, the Athenians smash the Persian fleet at the Eurymedon River, so in Asia Minor. And this is yet again another massive setback for Achaemenid power in the Aegean. Now, the victory at Eurymedon is notoriously celebrated by an artifact known as the Eurymedon vase. So again, this is used to pour wine at a symposium, so it exists like so many of the artifacts we've looked at in a sympotic context. But here you have on one side a Persian, someone who's dressed in what for the Greeks is a kind of stereotypically Persian dress. He's got his hands up, and it's debated whether he's making some kind of silly face, or perhaps he's holding on to kind of an invisible column to brace himself, presenting his rear area. And then when you turn the vase around, you see that a Greek is coming with his member ready to anally penetrate this Persian. So I say this not because, again, the goal is just to talk about dirty Greek pottery, but I mean, here you very much see the kind of sexual ideologies of power in Athens, whereby the penetrator is presented as the victorious, dominant, and here Greek figure, and then the submissive, penetrated figure is the dominated foreigner. So in the Greek way of thinking, we have a military victory, an imperial victory, nonetheless interpreted as a active, passive, homosexual pairing. Again, this is clearly a way that the Greeks think about power as they, or at least a Greek male, I should say, thinks about power as they think about the world around them. So by the time we get to the late 460s, the Persians, while certainly not absent, have nonetheless seen another massive setback. Athens itself has become predominantly a naval power, so that most of the Athenians involved, including those involved at the great victory at Eurymedon, have been involved as rowers and sailors, and that is going to have an impact on the nature of the Athenian democracy. We also continue to see a potential for tension between Athens and Sparta, particularly as Athens' power and military prestige grows. And so what we're going to talk about on Friday is going to be the changes to the Athenian democracy, how it becomes more radical, and the fallout of those tensions between Athens and Sparta, which will manifest them in this so-called First Peloponnesian War. So that'll be our topic for this video, in a shorter video on Friday. Again, do keep reading the textbook, and I do hope that you'll email me your questions because there's nothing I'd like to address in these videos than the questions that you have from both the textbook and the video lectures. So we'll talk more Friday. Good day.